comentários projetos, está naquele
Eles são 34, ele é que é projeto.
Vou gostar de outros.
É antiquado fazer coisas que realmente funcionam.
Exato.
Fazer qualquer coisa ultra moderna que não funciona.
Hello everyone, so welcome to another CFTC seminar. So it's our pleasure to have João here, who's going to talk about his PhD project on discrete landscapes of folding. João, thank you very much for accepting.
Thank you. So hello everyone. As Diogo said, my name is João Neves. I'm doing my PhD here at CFTC. I'm on my third year, and I'm going to talk about my work on mapping the discrete landscape of folding. This work I'm doing with Professors Nuno Araújo and Cristóvão Dias, and also with funding from FCT, of course. This work has been recently published, so if you want to know more about it, you can check the QR code over there. And yeah, so first of all, what do we talk about when we're talking about folding? So folding is becoming a more and more relevant manufacturing process due to the reduction in material waste. It also reduces the need for welding and molding. So it's a very efficient way of producing any type of object. So if you think about it in terms of something like 3D printing, the third dimension is always the hardest to make. So you make something in 2D in a plane, you start printing it, and then if you want to add layer by layer, it's more complicated. So folding appears as a kind of a shortcut in order to do this, which is, so if you print everything basically in a plane, then you're able to get the third dimension simply by folding. So this is a shortcut to many of those problems. And there's a very clear example. If you think, for example, in the infamous Cybertruck of Elon Musk, so it's done like this. So they print everything, or they laser cut it in a big aluminium sheet, and then they fold it in order to convey that awful form. But we're not doing Cybertrucks, we are focusing on kirigami. So as many of you know, kirigami is it's very similar to origami, which is simply you take a 2D sheet of paper, you apply some folds to it, and you're able to get a 3D figure, something like this tsuru over here. So in kirigami what we do is we not only apply some folds, but we also cut the paper in a very specific way in order to give it a very specific shape. So for example, here we have this template or net of a cube. This is called the Latin cross template, and I'm going to talk about it a lot over this presentation. But as you can see, if you start folding it over the edges over there, you're able to get to the cube. So why do we study these types of structures? Why do we study this method of manufacturing? So folding, it's widely used, and it can be used in a broad range of scales, and this is what I'm trying to convince you with this slide. So at the micro scale, it can be used to develop some drug delivery systems, also soft robotic systems, but that's not all. So you have a broad range of applications, and I'm going to start with at the nanometer scale. So there are some examples of these tiny DNA strand kirigami, which can be used in the context of, for example, vaccination. As you can see here, you have these structures which are able to capture antigens, and they will be able to be better received by your body because of their spacious substructure. Then you have also these other examples of DNA kirigami, in which the hinges function as, so the DNA strands act as hinges and also as gluing spots on the kirigami, which is what you see over there. Moving on to the micrometer scale, you have this example with actually the Latin cross template, in which you have a substrate, and then you can put cells over it, and these cells work as actuators. The cell traction force is what will pull the kirigami together, and you can make the shape that you want. In this case, it is the cube. So this is being realized. This is actual these are actual experimental work. So this has been actually realized at the micrometer scale. Moving on, we have this example of a robot which starts as a full 2D setup. So you have sort of like a kirigami in which you have some hinges and you have some batteries on top with motors, with actuators on the hinges, and this robot is able to self-fold into something that stands up and actually can walk. Maybe I'll just skip to the walking part because, yeah. So it is able to actually walk, and it started as a 2D thing. So if you can reduce the size of these batteries and these motors, maybe you can have like a very thin sheet of a robot which is able to stand up and perform something. It is also, folding is also very used when we talk about space instrumentation. So you have these examples of satellite plates that need to be very wide, and in order for us to transport it, as you know, it costs a lot of money to send something up to space, so you need these structures to be as compact as possible. So a lot of research has been done in how to provide an optimal way of compactness and make these structures occupy as less space as possible in order to take them to space. But this is not all. So recently, folding has been used as motivation or as a method to produce metamaterials. So metamaterials are materials which have properties that don't naturally occur in any type of material. So you can have examples such as impact absorption or different reactions to stimuli from outside. You can have something like a negative thermal expansion, which is what you see here in the middle. And you have these programmable shapes which you can, they are modular and you can connect them together in order to have a different response to external stimuli. So over here, so there's a lot of ways to do this. Most of them, they work with a setup in which we do something called miura ori, which is a defined set of cuts and folds, which is what you see over here. So you have these pieces that are glued together, and these two materials, they have a different reaction to heat, and one expands and the other stays the same for that temperature range. So, and this is able to actually contract when it heats up. And this is done using miura ori. But you can also have this type of modular structures which are made by folding, and if you combine them together, you have this example of structures that can sustain different types of stimuli, such as trains from different sizes. So how are we going to do this? How do we study this? What are we actually doing with kirigami? So in order to first talk about this, maybe we need to go back and talk about how do we perceive these types of structures and who started to look at this in this way that we do today. So we have to talk about Duret. Duret was a German painter, and he was very interested in drawing polyhedra in a very exact manner. So as you can see in this very famous painting of his, it's not actually a painting, but I don't know the word in English, gravura. So he drew this very specific polyhedra, which sparked a lot of discussion, not only about which polyhedra this is, that you can see because it's cut, you only see a perspective of it, but also what it means philosophically in the context of his painting. But well, he was very interested in how can I draw these structures exactly, and how can I be able to make this for everybody to draw. So he came up with these nets, this way of just producing a template of the polyhedra, which you do by cutting up all of the edges and then folding it, and then if you if you provide this type of structure to anybody, they are able to simply fold all of the edges and construct a polyhedron. And he did this for the truncated icosahedron net, which, as you can see, is fairly complicated, but he did it to a bunch of different polyhedra, and he published it in a book. Also, Doré, he didn't only draw them and produce them, he also questioned himself about, okay, so if I take every polyhedra, every convex polyhedra, do I know for certain that this polyhedra has a net? Am I able to take any convex polyhedra, cut it up, and in a way unfold it so that it is a 2D thing that doesn't overlap? Well, this question is called Doré's conjecture, and we still don't have an answer for it. So, yeah. What we do know is that a lot of these structures, they have known nets, known templates. For example, you can see here the platonic solids. The tetrahedron has 2 templates each. The cube and the octahedron have 11 each. But then if you go to the dodecahedron and the icosahedron, this number skyrockets to 43,000 nets each. So this is a problem that, well, the number of things with which you have to deal, it increases very fastly. So you have a problem of combinatorial explosion in this case. So you need to approach this in a very specific way, not just by trial and error and looking at these structures and see if everything works. So our idea of how do we approach this problem of folding, how do we try to know more about this process is, okay, what we want to do is we want to propose an algorithm to discretize the whole space of folding. So we have this template over here. This is an example of a simulation in which the template is in a fluid, and with thermal fluctuations it is moving and it is able to close. So what we want to know is if we take this continuous space of folding in which we have a lot of moving plates, they are connected by hinges, and we have a lot of these moving plates. We want to discretize this space and say, okay, we only care about structures which have binding of faces. So if, for example, if we have this structure, it can be like this, like this, like this, it doesn't matter. This is the same structure. If there's a binding of a face, I don't care about the angle of these structures, this one is my structure. So we want to discretize the whole space like this, and we want to map this folding process by these specific structures that we find. So we want to know how to go from the template to the cube, and what are the possible pathways to do this, and what are the possible structures which we will pass by in the process. So how do we do this? So first, the idea is to project these structures into graphs and deal with something which we already know. So what we do firstly is, in this case, we construct a graph, which we call a face graph, in which we give each face a node, and we assign adjacent faces as nodes that are connected on the graph, which is what you can see here. Then we can translate any type of face binding as a new link that is created in the graph. So for example, if I want to connect these two faces, what I will have is I will create a new link in the graph, and this represents a different structure. Okay? So this is the idea of how to discretize this whole space. In the same way, if you want to create a new structure by cutting up some edges of the cube. So for example, if we cut these 3 edges of the cube, this means that we are removing 3 links from the graph of the cube, and it means that we can open up a face. So this is basically the idea. We project these structures into graphs, and then we deal with the graphs, and we find subsets of these graphs that represent different structures. Okay? So now I'm going to talk about how we implement this, so bear with me. So first of all, what we do is we take two structures that we know that they are obtained through folding or through unfolding, and we take an initial structure and the final structure. So for example here, this is the structure you've been seeing throughout all the presentation, is the Lightning Cross and the cube. And we know that we can fold one into the other. So what we do is, as I said before, we project these structures into graphs. So over here you have the face graph, in which you take each face, assign it a node. Adjacent faces mean that the nodes are connected in the face graph. You do this for the polyhedra and for the template, and you do the same thing for the shell graph. So the shell graph is very intuitive to understand. You simply take every vertex, and every vertex is a node, and then vertices that are connected by edges are connected by links in the graph. So these are the two ingredients that we need in order to start our algorithm. Then what we do is we construct the cut graph. So the cut graph is simply you subtract the face graph of the template to the face graph of the cube. What this means is that this subset of edges, these are the edges that we need to actually cut in order to fully unfold the cube. Or if you think about it in another way, these are the edges that you need to connect in order to fully fold the template into the cube. And if you look at the parallel, which is the shell graph, it is very intuitive as well, because you can think that if you put this into a cube, you cut up all of these edges, you are able to fully unfold it. Okay? So what we want is to search for subsets of this graph, so edges in this graph that are connected, and they will represent different structures on the folding process of the cube. For that, we use a sort of a depth-first search algorithm to search for subsets of this graph. So how do we do this? Well, we start by choosing a starting edge. Let's say it is that one. This will be the first configuration, a one-edge configuration. Then we identify its adjacent edges as possible follow-ups to this one-edge configuration, which is the edge over there. So we're always talking about this graph over here, so finding subsets of this graph. And the third thing that we do is we take this doesn't show up here, but we take the folded polyhedra, so in this case our final configuration, as the parent configuration of this configuration that we have just found, that is the one-edge configuration. Okay? This is important because we're not interested in only probing and listing all of the substructures that we find in the process. We are also interested in mapping the process. So we want to know how does this structure evolve, and to which structure does one structure evolve to. So this is the point of constructing this relational map. Then what we do is we identify whether this configuration that we have just constructed has been found before. If it has been found before, we move on further along the algorithm. If it hasn't, we save it, and we ask ourselves whether it is a folding state or it isn't a folding state. And what do I mean by this? So a folding state, it means that I have created a foldable edge when I do some cutting. So for example, over here, you cut this one edge and you aren't able to open up anything, okay? But if you cut these three edges, you are able to open up a face, you create a foldable edge, and this means that you have created a new folding state, okay? So we identify whether it is a folding state or not, and we save it accordingly. Then, if we haven't seen this structure before, we move on to step 5, and in step 5 we will construct new configurations. So we take the follow-ups that we have already identified, and we construct new configurations by adding these follow-ups. These structures, these new structures, they are added to a cube, and the follow-ups of these structures are also added to a follow-up cube. And then, also a very important part is we take these new configurations and we assign them as child configurations of the current configuration. So over here, you see this new configuration that I have just added to a queue, and we take it as the child configuration of the current one. Why is this important? When we find a configuration that we have already identified before, we can simply stop, because we have already established the parent-child relationship beforehand, before we even deal with this structure. So when we reach over there to step number 4, and we know that we have seen this structure before, we simply go to step 6, and in step 6 what we do is we take a new configuration from the queue, and we go back to 4. So we ask ourselves, has this structure been found before? Has it not? Is it a folding state? We construct new configurations, and we take, well, it's the same and the same and the same and the same. When the queue is empty, we simply go to the first step again. We choose another starting edge. When there are no more starting edges, we simply stop the algorithm. In the end, we will have a bunch of these different configurations that you find here, and they are all connected by, so there's an evolution process from one structure to the other, or from one set of edges to the other, if you want. So, to tell you a bit more of the specifics of the algorithm, I told you that we find folding states by identifying foldable edges. So how do we do this? Well, you can think about this, so we're always dealing with graphs, right? So if you think about this as a phase graph, what we want to know is, did I create a new red link when I created this structure? So what are red links? Red links are links in the graph, or edges in the structure, that if you cut, you separate the structure into two pieces, okay? So if you look at the structure over here, I can cut any type of edge, and I will separate the structure into two pieces. In this case, I can cut any edge that I want, and I won't separate the cube. It's impossible, okay? So this is the idea. When I create a foldable edge, it means that I have created a red link. Because if this can move, it means that it isn't constrained by anything else than this edge over here. If I cut it, I separate the structure into two pieces. How do we find these red links? Well, if we are suspicious that this specific link is a red link, we take a copy of this graph, we take an instance of this graph, and we cut this link. Then we apply a burning algorithm. What do I mean? I start with one node, I burn it, and in the next iteration, the fire spreads to its neighboring nodes, and then to its neighboring nodes, and to its neighboring nodes. In the end, when there's nothing else to burn, I check if the whole structure has been burned or not. If it has been burned, it means that the fire is able to spread to the whole structure. If it has not, it means that there is something that was cut. So the structure is two pieces. So if the structure is two pieces, it means that the link that I have just cut, it is a red link, and I have discovered a foldable edge.
Just to see if there is a vertex without any links. I don't get what you mean burning algorithm. Because there, that phase has no links, right, in your graph.
Yeah, in this case, sure.
So there are cases where,
yeah, for example, here it's not easy to see, but I will show you an example further on, which is if you have, for example, two substructures like this, and this one is a red link, and if you close it like this, well, these nodes over here have a lot of links as well, but there's one that is a red link. So, yeah. In this case, sure. I mean, if this structure has no links, it means that it is a red link, sure.
Just one question before about your algorithm. How do you guarantee that you always have this template? Because if I can cut a random edge, and because there are multiple templates, right, even from the queue.
Yes.
But you always want this specific template, right? Or
yeah. I mean, the idea is that you give the template and the final configuration as an input. and then what you do is you construct the cut graph.
Okay, so you only cut, so when you're saying you cut the edges, you only take the shell graph, like you were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Only those edges.
Only
that
those
are-
edges matter, yeah.
Okay.
And we're always looking for subgraphs of that very specific graph, of the cut graph. So this is how we maintain that, so we don't get anything, we don't go towards another template. So that is the idea. So if you the maximum subset of the graph that you want is the cut graph itself, and it will give you this structure over here.
So is it always unique?
Yes.
So for the cube, I imagine yes. For any structure,
it
it
is.
is.
Yeah. And I mean, it's simply looking at the graph, and I mean, if I run it 1,000 times, it will give me.
Oh yeah, I just don't know if I increase the complexity of the structure, if it's always unique. I mean, I guess probably. But I
It
don't know
is.
if
I mean, I think it is. I'm pretty sure because there's no randomness or no type of decision that you need to make over there. The conditions don't change. It is simply a graph, and they're searching for subgraphs on it. So, and also because we extend to all the possibilities. So, I mean, if you could start in one edge and then you simply you just start in one edge and do the search for that edge, maybe you would lead to different results if you would choose another edge first. But we do this for every edge, for every starting edge, so it doesn't change. Yeah. So in order also to check if we have found these structures before, we perform this hashing algorithm, and we are able to uniquely identify the structures given the cut graph that we want. So for example, this is very hard to see, but I can exemplify it over here. So this is a cube with simply one cut over here. So this means that only cut B, we only have cut B on the cube. So we can uniquely identify the structure if we simply order all of these edges. So we index all of these edges, and we know that if we assign 1 to edge B and 0 to all of the other edges, we can define a binary number which uniquely defines the structure given this face graph. Over here you have 3 edges, so something like this, and you have 3 cuts, so there's the binary number that represents this structure is 11, and this uniquely identifies the structure given the face graph. So you can quickly see if this structure has been found before or not when you're dealing with this new structure. In the end, all of these configurations of cuts, I'm sorry you can't see this very well, but there are red lines over here that symbolize the cuts. These all correspond to folding states. I mean, the ones that are folding states, they actually correspond to actual intermediate configurations in the folding process of the cube, okay? So this is what the algorithm gives us in the end, but not quite. So there's a catch here. If we are looking for this type of subsets in this manner that I showed you, we are only going to get, we are searching for a path in the cut graph. So if we want something that it's not adjacent, it has cuts in one hemisphere and then cuts in another hemisphere and they aren't connected, the algorithm won't find that. So for example, if you look at the structure over here, in which I have something like this, the algorithm will never be able to get this because we're looking for paths. When I find a new configuration, I need a follow-up, and the follow-up is an adjacent edge of the structure of the configuration of edges that I have already found. So if they aren't connected, the algorithm won't get it. So we need to tackle this challenge as well. So what we do is we recursively apply the algorithm to the folding states that we have already found. So what we want is we want to search for linear combinations of the things that we have found previously. So what we do is we take this structure over here, so all of the folding states that we have already found, we assign it as an initial configuration, and we take the Q as a final configuration as well. The algorithm will perform, so we will look for the cut graph, so the graph that transforms this cube into this, and we will search for subsets in that graph as well. In the end, we are able to get that structure over there, which we haven't found before. And well, you can ask me, won't this affect the performance of your algorithm as you're doing your homework over and over and over again? No, because actually, if you know the whole configuration landscape already, when you reach something which you already know, you simply stop, because there's no need to go that further. You're already getting the relational map of the things that you haven't found before. You know what's going further, so you don't need to go there. So it's not that inefficient. Of course, you need to do more steps, but you're also finding something new which you haven't found before. So it works better. In the end, we have this relational map of all these different configurations of cuts, and they are connected. And in order to get the graph of evolving structures, we simply identify which of these structures are the folding states. We backtrack on the graph, and we find the relationships between these two structures. So we know that this structure over here, this folding state, is connected to that folding state over there. And in the end, we will have something like this folding network, which starts with the template and ends up on the cube. And in the end, we have all of these different structures to which the folding process will go by. But we are able to even simplify this a bit more. So if you look at these four structures over here, these are different structures for sure, because the face that is open, the foldable edge that we have created is always different. Sometimes it's this one, sometimes it's this one, but it is the same structure all the time. So it is simply a matter of, if I look at this, it is simply a matter of relabeling the faces. If I do a permutation on the face labels, if I do a rotation, something like that, it is simply the same structure. So we want a method of combining these structures and to know that they have a degeneracy. For example, here it is 4, but we want to combine them. And what we do is we search for isomorphic folding states. So we look at the graphs of these structures, and we know that these graphs are all very similar, they are isomorphic, so we are able to group all of these structures into one, and this is able to simplify a lot the things that we have found already. In the end, we have a bunch of different structures, a bunch of different folding states, and so here it is just a matter of organizing everything that we have found. So in the center you have the folding state which we have found, and then on the outer circle on a lighter color you have all the isomorphic folding states that we have found, and then on the darker color semicircle you have all of these configurations of cuts that the algorithm finds, and that actually, so the idea is that, for example, over here on the cube, if you have one cut, this structure is still the cube. You can't open up an additional face or something like that. This structure is still the cube. So these are all the configurations that lead to this very folding state. And they are organized by the number of red links in this case. So on A you have 0 red links, here you have 1 red link, here you have 2, because you have 2 foldable edges, over there you have 3, and then 5. So this structure over here on green is the only one that we find that is found through recursively applying the algorithm. In the very end, you have something like this. So a much simpler graph. We have the same structure, so it starts on the template, it ends up on the cube, and then we know that, for example, this structure over here has a degeneracy of 4, so you can go there in multiple ways. But, well, we've done this for the Latin cross template, but we can do this for a lot of templates, maybe even the 11 of the cube. and we have something like this, in which we have all of the different templates on the outer circle, and we have the cube in the middle, and the structure I was telling you about is this one over here. I don't know if you can see it. It has one red link in the middle, and then everything else is connected. So you are able to cut that red link over there, and these nodes, they still have links to go to other faces. So this is just one of the examples. Yeah, so this is useful because you have established the map of configuration. So imagine that you have a material that you want to cut, and this material is a cube, and you want to get a very specific template, and you don't want to get any of the other ones. You know which are the key cuts that you need to make in order to drive the unfolding from that, and you also know which are the key folds or the edges that you need to make faster or slower in order to get where you want. This is simply a question of defining which weight you want to put on these connections between configurations. And now I'm going to pass more about to the applications of this algorithm. So we have established that we can use a template and a polyhedra, a folded polyhedra, as an initial and final configuration. We have established that we can use one of these configurations as an initial configuration to find the linear combinations, but we can do something else. For example, we can have two final configurations as well, as in this case over here. So this is a template of an octahedron over there, but we are actually able to fold it into the octahedron, of course, and something else which we call bolt-like structure, tetrahedron structure. Let's see if I can get it. I hope so. No. This is a lot of pressure, but I'm I'm pretty confident you can do this. Maybe Danielle, if you can help me afterwards. But yeah, you can fold it into this bolt-like structure if you do something different. Okay, I got it. Yeah, so this is a structure that folds into two different final configurations. So if we apply this to the algorithm, we take this configuration and that one, we apply the algorithm, we do the same with this bolt-like structure. We are able to find which of these intermediate structures, intermediate configurations are common, and we can build this graph that tells you exactly if you want to go to one structure or the other, where do you need to stop, or what is the bifurcation that you're interested in guaranteeing that it follows a very specific path. So you can optimize your materials in order to do this if you know the whole process, the whole map. So yeah, right now we've used two final configurations, one initial configuration as an open structure, a structure that is not a polyhedron. We can do more than that. For example, we can use these open structures also as final configurations. So this is what we have here, in which we have these two structures that I've already told you about, but we have these misfolds. What do I mean by this? So this, I think it's easier to do, but if I have something like this, for example, this is simply the bolt, but one of the faces is folded inwards, so it is a misfold, right? This face is connected to a face that isn't supposed to. So I have to break a bond, I have to break an edge in order to correctly fold this structure into one of these other structures. So we have found 3 of these, but maybe there's more, I don't know. But the idea here is that if you find one of these structures, if you find a structure that it is not correctly connected, you can simply apply the algorithm and know, okay, which is the path that may have led me here. So for example, you can do something like this. So you start always with the same template, and you can end up with these correctly folded structures or with these misfolds. The structures on yellow, these are structures that, well, once you've gone here, you need to break a bond in order to go back to the correct path. So all of these structures over here have a bond that is not the one that you should have done. So by looking at this graph, you know exactly how far you can go if you let your structure go loose, and how far you need to go back in order to put it on the correct path again. So this gives you a lot of information on the folding process, and you can use this accordingly to what you want. And well, we've done this for the template of the octahedron, but you can do this for the cube as well. And this is mainly the work of Bernardo. He was able to identify all of these different structures, these different misfolds, which is what we see on orange. So these are all misfolds of the cube, and the yellow ones are the ones that lead up to these misfolds of the cube, and that you need to, of course, break a bond in order to get to the cube, which you haven't already. So this is the final map of the folding network of the cube with also its misfolds. To tell you a bit about how this scales.
João, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why weren't you, because before you didn't have these misfolds, and how did you change the algorithm to find them?
So the idea here is always that you change the cut graph. So if you have this structure over here, and you start with this template, the cut graph will be different. So this is always the thing. All of these structures, they are defined by their connections. So how their faces are connected to each other. And so our hypothesis is that you can uniquely define these configurations just by that. So it's just a matter of changing the cut graph. Then to represent them and to be able to know where they are folded, it takes a bit more of like defining the angles and whatnot.
But before you were already taking the cut graph, right?
Yeah.
But you still weren't identifying these ones.
Because
the yellow ones.
so what I did before is I would take this template over here and the cube, and I would construct a cut graph that if I cut that cube, it leads me to this template. Okay. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm taking this structure over here, and I'm taking this structure over here, and I'm taking the cut graph that lets me transform that structure in this one.
Okay, so you're taking the misfolded structures that can't fold anymore. Is that what the orange ones are?
Exactly.
And then you're going back into the template. Then how do
Exactly.
you find these orange structures? The orange ones. Because
The
you
orange
know
ones,
what the cube
yeah.
is, but the orange ones.
So
they can-
this is just structures that we find, for example, on simulations, or
Okay.
by looking at the cube and trying to find examples of these misfolds. So this is simply something that we input to the algorithm. It is not the scope of this work. For example, Afonso Gurjão was doing something similar, in which he could not get all of the misfolds, but try to understand if you can predict how it correctly folds just by giving the template. But it is not the scope of the work to find these misfolds. We simply take them as stuff that we already know. So the idea here is that if you find one of these structures and you know they are possible, you can simply input them into the algorithm, and you know all of the intermediate structures in between. So that is the idea. So to tell you a bit about how this scales, so what we see here is a graph in which we have, so for example, this is for the dodecahedron and the icosahedron, which, as I said, have 43,000 nets each. So the idea here is that you provide the net to the algorithm, and the net will give you 10 new intermediate configurations. Then you provide another net and it will give you more 10. So here you will have 20 configurations. If you keep on doing this and doing this, you will see that the scaling of this cumulative number of configurations, it scales sublinearly with the number of nets, and that actually starts to decrease once you reach a certain amount of nets. So this is an idea that the algorithm scales well with the number of templates that you give it, and I think more than that, it is an example and a clue that this configurational space in which we are searching for different structures, it is very well behaved and very predictable. So in the end, what you are doing is maybe you know all of the core of this configurational map, but you still don't know all the outskirts of this thing. So what you are doing is you are providing one new template and maybe something over here in this area, and that's it. Then you jump to something which you already know. So this is the idea. I think this is an example of how well behaved this configurational space is. So the next steps in this algorithm, in this work, so we want to find correlations between the geometric structures that we are providing to the algorithm. So for example, looking at the templates and the polyhedra, we want to know, okay, how does the structure of our obtained maps, how does it correlate with simple properties or not so simple properties of the structures that we provided. So for example, we can talk about the number of faces, edges, the number of vertex connections, the diameter, the gyration radius. So you want to find these types of correlation between these geometric aspects of the structures that we input to the algorithm and the folding map that we obtain for these very specific networks. So here you can talk about a lot of properties of networks. I have listed some of them, but well, this is we can use another ones. And for example, here I have this edge probability, which I'm defining simply as the out degree of a node. But actually, this can be tuned to a more specific problem. So if I know how these probabilities of transition change, I'm able to better characterize the whole network, and I'm better able to study a specific system. So we've built a map. Right now we want to apply that map to a very specific problem. For example, something which we are doing right now, and so this, I'm already leaving the part of the work that is published, but we are working on something which we call mechanofolding. So this is a specific problem, a specific setup in which we can apply our map and see what happens. So the idea here is to provide a stochastic mechanical stimuli in the macro scale and to drive the folding process through that. So over here what we have is a simulation in which we take the template, we put it on a vibrating table, an oscillating table, and we see what happens if we change the amplitude and the frequency. And you can see that in this case the cube actually folds. And we are also doing this experimentally with the oscillating table that Daniel has built in the lab, and you can change the frequency and the amplitude of this thing. One of the things that we have found, and it's fairly intuitive, is that there is a change in how we can fold if we change the frequency of oscillation of the table. So over here, if you don't provide enough energy, if it's a low frequency, you can never go to the state in which you have the face meeting each other and folding. Over here, you can get folding pretty quick. But if you provide too much energy, if you have a very high frequency, it means that the faces they meet and they bind together, but then there's another hit and they separate, so you don't have enough energy to keep the cube folded. So there is an optimal frequency and there is an optimal amplitude as well in order to do this folding. What we're doing right now is we're looking at this simulation, and we start with the template, and we want to know, okay, where will this template go? And we want to do this very experiment like 1,000 times, and we want to know, out of the 1,000 times that I do this experiment, how many times do I go from the template to this structure over here? So in this case it goes to that structure over here. If I do this 1,000 times, I'm able to take a probability of transition out of this very specific transition and out of all of the transitions as well. Also, if I know the time that it takes for that one to reach this one, I'm able to define a rate, and if I do this consistently with a lot of examples, I'm able to take out the rates from all of these structures. And of course, we also do this experimentally. So we always want to compare our results not only to the simulations that we're doing, and we can do 1,000 of those every hour with the cluster, of course. And then Danielle is only able to do well, less. But it's always useful to experiment, to compare it with the experimental part. Of course, this has a problem. So if we start only with the template and we see where does this evolve to, some of these structures which may be not that much visited, their transitions will be undersampled. So in order to solve this, we decided to do an umbrella sampling. So we simply take each of these configurations, we run the simulation with this template as a starting template, with this configuration on top of the vibrating table, and we do this 1,000 times. And we check out of these 1,000 times, how many times does this structure go here, how many times does it go here or there, and we are able to obtain the transition rates to this system over here. And we take out the undersampling problem in this way. So, in conclusion, I hope I have convinced you that we have developed a method to map this continuous process of folding into this discrete set of folding states and their respective pathways. So our current goal is to study this stochastic mechanical stimuli to drive the folding process and understand how these different setups, how these different experimental setups influence the result of the whole folding network. And future goals are to systematically search for correlations, as I've already told you, to optimize the developed methods, of course, and to construct a large and accessible platform to study this Kirigami edge unfolding. This is halfway done. If you look in the article, you have a GitHub repository in which you can find this algorithm and you can play with it, and we intend to expand this to include much more tools and everything that we're working on in this area. So now, if you have questions, please.
Thank you very much. Question.
Two very, very simple questions. In your simulations, two adjacent faces can only be connected by one edge.
Can you repeat?
In your simulations, can two adjacent faces only be connected by one edge?
Yes.
And
You mean if they were connected by a vertex or something?
And in the first experiments that you showed with cells and stuff like that, can they accidentally fold two adjacent faces above each other?
Sure, they can. And this is, for example, in doing simulations, this is something which we deal with. And I mean, not only in simulation, also experimentally.
But in that case, they connect by more than one edge.
What do you mean? They can fold on top of each other, yeah. And in simulations, this is possible. So we have some ways of guaranteeing that doesn't happen that frequently and that we can mitigate that problem. For example, in simulations, what we do is we put a repulsive potential between these two centers, or we make sure that we have a big sphere over here, and that
So if you have a minimal angle.
yeah, trying to find a minimal angle, which is actually what we do here experimentally. I mean, the neologists, which is to make sure that this has a specific height and that you can't go further than this. So yeah, find a minimal angle.
More questions? Yes.
In your algorithm, you start from the fully closed, for example, the cube. You start from fully closed and you start cutting edges, right? And
Yeah.
you see if it's an equality. But when you say that you put the template, for example, of the cross, it means that at a certain point you don't do some cuts because you know that you want to get to the cross, or how does it work? It's not clear.
So you can think about it like that,
Okay.
but yeah, we don't do some of the possible cuts because we are going towards the cross. So the idea here is to always we search for the cut graph. So we search for this graph over here, and we are only interested in finding finding cuts that belong to this cut graph. If we make sure that we are doing that, we won't get any other templates.
Because the cut graph is specifically of this specific cut graph is from the cross.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So if you want to do other templates, you get a different cut graph. If you want to do misfold, you get a different one. So this is all dependent always on the initial and final configuration that you choose. So, and the idea here is that there is a way of folding, there is a folding process that transforms this structure over here into the final one. And so we always work with what's in between.
So you go through all of this algorithm and then you hash the edges, right? How better or worse is this than just hashing the edges and brute force it to find all the configurations?
That's a very good question, because we actually started to do that when we started working on this. I mean, over here you have two problems. One of it is that you need to find a new way of establishing this parent-child relationship between configurations. So that there is a way probably, but yeah. And the other one is that, okay, with the cube this is fairly simple because it's 7 edges that you need to deal with, so you have 7 factorial configurations. But when you move on to the dodecahedron, it becomes completely impossible. So that it gives us a problem, which is a scaling problem of a factorial explosion that it is difficult to deal with. And in this way, so we are able to do the dodecahedron, we are able to do the icosahedron, which are bigger structures, and we're fairly confident that they work. So, and if we were to try everything factorially, probably it would take much longer.
Yeah, I mean, of course it scales very badly for more complicated shapes, but I was just thinking because if you actually have it in this hash form, you could apply constraints to it to, like, for example, do this relational thing where you say, for example, for the cube, let's take this example, that you know that the first fold state would be you need at least 3 cuts, for example, so you can start with this and then you reduce the number of combinations. And I can imagine that you could apply other constraints, maybe more complicated constraints to reduce the number of combinations, and also make this graph of like this path of different folding states.
Yeah, I mean, totally you could do that. That was actually our first approach. So also we did, so what you're saying, we provided some constraints. So for example, that one that you said, that you need at least 3 cuts if you have this this squared face, and also in terms of like the structures evolving to one another, you can also make sure that if you do and or operations on these binary numbers, you are able to follow a specific path in which you don't lose or you don't get anything that it isn't satisfied. But this also it creates a new problem of you can have structures which aren't geometrically possible. So you also need to deal with that. And just by looking at this binary number of this session, you don't have an idea of geometry. I mean, you don't with the graphs as well, but it gives you, so this is a way which is more intuitive in terms of you can relate this to actually following a path with a scissor. So it reduces the level of complexity in that aspect.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, let's thank the speaker again.